Today you'll see a publication from me called The Effects on Deficit, Trump versus Biden. This begins with a report by the non-partisan Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget. And what this committee does, and it's really good to have a non-partisan estimate, is to take three scenarios for each candidate, a high estimate, a central estimate, and a low estimate. And they calculate the effects of each major category in the budget of each of these, or in the program for each of these candidates, and what their effect would be on the budget deficit over a 10-year period from 2021 to 2030. Both of these programs, the central estimates of both of these programs, which I referred to in my piece, have enormous impacts on the budget deficit. The Trump program increases the US budget deficit over a 10-year period by $4.95 trillion US, and the Biden program increases the budget deficit by $5.6 trillion US. The enormous difference between the two programs is that Trump cuts taxes, private and corporate taxes, and Biden increases private and corporate taxes. And the total of tax cuts under Trump are $1.7 trillion US, and the total of all of the increase in taxes under Biden are $4.3 trillion US. So the difference between the two is $6 trillion US. Of course, that's over 10 years, but in an average year, the US economy is $20 trillion US. So those tax increases of Biden relative to Trump are enormous relative to the size of US GDP. It's interesting to note that Biden would raise the corporate tax rate from 21 to 28%. When corporate taxes were cut in 2018 and 2017, what happened was that a lot of write-offs and carve-outs were removed, so that the corporate tax was actually broadened, even though it was cut. When Biden increases the corporate tax rate back up to 28%, he's actually going to get more total corporate tax revenue than was the case before 2017. So the impact on after-tax corporate earnings is much greater than is commonly estimated. This increase in corporate taxes must reduce retained earnings that corporations have to invest. This action directly damages future growth and output, corporate earnings, and individual wages. And the Committee for Responsible Budget estimates that these actions take away about $1.8 trillion in profits away from the corporate sector. The more familiar we become with the Biden program, the more we can see the influence of Bernie Sanders. In this election, the Democratic primary selection process was cut short by the intervention of the pandemic. The result was that Biden was selected as candidate only after considerable negotiation within the Democratic National Committee between the supporters of Biden and the supporters of Sanders. The result is that the Sanders supporters appear to gain an enormous part of their proposals within the Biden program. The result is to increase both the components of taxing and spending within the Biden program. Even though the size of the deficits are similar in the Trump program and the Biden program increases taxes by much, much more and increases spending by much, much more. The taxes selected and the spending selected strongly reflect the populist nature of Sanders supporters. There are dramatic increases in spending in the Biden program on childcare and education, healthcare and long-term care, which means aged care, social security and retirement, plus increases in spending on green projects. Now, those green projects are referred to within the Biden program as infrastructure. Now, if we were going to see proposals like this within a European social democratic structure, they'd be financed by an increase in the value-added tax in Europe. And that makes spending economically neutral in terms of its effect on growth. However, within the populist program advanced by Sanders, these proposals are paid for by dramatic increases in the taxes on business and investment. And these taxes have the result of damaging long-term US growth, increasing the marginal tax rates on income earners, and also damaging potential private investment. I've spoken before about the work of Kevin Hassett. Kevin Hassett was chairman of the Council of Economic Advisers under President Trump in 2017 and 2018. This year, he has been heading a team at the Hoover Institution at Stanford University. This team includes himself, Casey Mulligan, another White House economist, Tim Fitzgerald and Cody Callan, and on the 13th of October they published a detailed paper called An Analysis of Vice President Biden's Economic Agenda, the Long-Run Impacts of Regulation, Taxes and Spending. This report is detailed and it is damning. It concludes that in the long run, the Biden agenda would reduce full-time equivalent employment per person by around 3%. The capital stock would fall per person by about 15%, and real GDP per capita would fall by more than 8%. Real consumption per household would decline over the 10-year period from 21 to 2030 by 7%. Relative to the Congressional Budget Office 2030 projection, this suggests that there would be 4.9 fewer jobs, fewer people employed in 2030, 2.6 trillion less in GDP, and 1.5 trillion less in consumption in 2030 alone. The median household in 2030 would be $6,500 less than it would be without the Biden program. They argue that the Biden agenda damages the US economy in three ways. Firstly, there is the attempt to move US transportation from a petroleum base to an electric base. This would require more inputs for the same level of output. And that means that there's a slump in productivity in the US economy, and that would result, they estimate that this would result in a decline of total factor productivity within the US economy by between 1% and 2%. Secondly, there is the additional cost through regulation and changes in healthcare. This would create what economists call labour wedges, which are inefficiencies in the labour market, which in turn reduce the output per worker. This damages labour productivity in the US economy. Thirdly, increasing taxes on capital would reduce capital investment. And this reduces output per worker by reducing the level of capital per worker. In conclusion, both Trump and Biden programs have large deficits of around $5 trillion over the period from 21 to 2030. Both produce a large stimulus to the US economy. Unfortunately, the Biden program also has costs which damage its benefits. It includes large business taxes and business regulation. These reduce employment over the 10-year period by 3%, GDP per capita over the 10-year period by 8%, and living standards over the period from 21 to 2030 by 7%. We must beware of left-wing populists bearing gifts.